This is Edward Siegel. Welcome to the Crisis Ahead podcast. Each week, we look at how companies, organizations, and individuals in the news are responding to, managing, or recovering from a crisis, and what you can learn from their successes or failures. My observations and recommendations are based on my experience managing crisis situations and advising others on how to respond to and bounce back from disasters, scandals, and other emergencies. My guest this week is Pamela Garber, who is a therapist with the Grand Central Counseling and Mediation Group in New York City. We'll be talking about what companies can do to help their employees in the aftermath of a crisis, such as workplace violence or a mass shooting. Pamela will be joining us shortly. But first, I want to say a word about short-term and long-term crisis situations. Some situations can last longer than others. Some may drag on for weeks, months, or years, while others are over and done with in a day or so. One crisis can inflict serious damage on a company or organization, while another creates nothing more than an embarrassing situation that is often quickly forgotten. One type of short-term crisis that makes news every so often is that of leaked emails. You may remember what happened last year at Tesla when the company sent an email to employees warning them to stop leaking information about the company. Well, guess what? That email was leaked to the press. Just the other day, ESPN suspended a reporter after someone leaked to social media a profane email the reporter had sent to a United States senator. Earlier this month, Amazon was in the news again when someone leaked an email the company had sent to employees. In that email, Amazon asked workers to delete the TikTok app from any device that had access to Amazon's email system. According to news reports, Amazon said that the email was sent by mistake, and there was no change in the company's policies about employees using TikTok. While it is impossible to prevent employees from leaking emails, companies should do their best to ensure workers understand the consequences of sharing confidential and sensitive information with others. Of course, if you don't want to see embarrassing or confidential information leaked to the press, don't send it out in the first place. Otherwise, you will have to live with the consequences. I've written a new book that provides important advice on how you can prevent, manage, and recover from a crisis. Crisis Ahead. 101 Ways to Prepare for and Bounce Back from Disasters, Scandals, and Other Emergencies. Crisis Ahead is now available as a paperback book wherever books are sold and as an ebook from Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Crisis Ahead is filled with case studies about how companies and public figures have prepared for and handled crisis situations, and the important lessons you can learn from their successes and failures. The book also includes checklists and exercises to help you get ready for and react to a crisis. You can learn more about the book at publicrelations.com. It's not too early to start preparing for the next crisis. That's because history shows there's always a next crisis, and the sooner you're ready for it, the better. A crisis such as workplace violence or a mass shooting can certainly affect the people who worked on, were involved with, or were impacted by these events. I'm pleased to have with us today an expert on this very important and timely topic. Pamela Garber is a therapist with the Grand Central Counseling and Mediation Group in New York City. She provides debriefing and crisis management services to organizations after on-site violence, including assault and theft. Pamela worked with management and employees to resolve other work-based disruptions. Welcome to the podcast, Pamela.
Oh, thank you. Happy to be here.
Based on your experience, what are some of the major issues that CEOs, managers, and other top company officials may have to deal with in the aftermath of a crisis at their company or organization?
Sure. The individual employee's personal life in terms of the support that that person has and what that support looks like for them after hours, outside of work hours, can actually become relevant during times of reassembling after a crisis. Typically, the focus, of course, is on the employee's performance during work hours, and in some cases, their availability outside of hours. But there's a greater need to be aware of the support system, living conditions, and stressors that individual employees face outside of work once there's been a crisis at work.
Have you found that employees and managers are likely to have similar problems after a violent crisis?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of overlap, but the ability to navigate the problems that typically, that are typically seen after a crisis, are dependent upon the support system, frequently dependent upon the support system, almost always that each employee has. But sure, to give you, some of the main problems are anxiety in the workplace, lack of focus, ability to concentrate, just a preoccupation and unrelenting focus on the incident that took place. And sometimes there's also an overlapping desire to push the event aside, and certain employees are seemingly more past the event, which can be very deceptive to management. Someone rolls up their sleeves and focuses on work, and it seems like the event is something that's out of sight, out of mind, and not relevant at work to the extent that it actually is germinating in the employee's mind. And that's when you say 3 months, 6 months down the road, what happened? So and so was adapting. This was certainly something significant, horrific, meaningful, but it seemed like they put the incident behind them. They've actually been, in some cases, more productive than we had seen in the past. And yet, this was 6 months ago. Why now? And so there's overlap of people who are focusing on it to the point that they can't do their work, and then others who seem to be 180 degrees the opposite. And in both cases, there's concern, cause for concern.
How can managers help employees after a crisis?
So the first is continuity of interaction with employees and management. Uh, a set, structured, organized um, system of getting together. I think the more informal, the better. But the formality would be having something on the calendar, set meetings on the calendar, where there's the ability to talk about what happened and then to talk about the forward momentum of what we're doing now. And even if the forward momentum aspect of the conversation doesn't cover much ground in terms of a long bullet point, a PowerPoint organized plan, and it's just a rough sketch and even an idea that, okay, there's a forward momentum needed. We do need to have a plan at some point for moving forward and what we're going to do, what the future is going to hold. The idea of that coming to light and being discussed is the portion that's the most productive, more so than the specifics of the actual plan in and of itself. It's the idea of putting the plan together, because more is happening outside of the discussion. It's the interaction of the team and everybody being an equal participant in what takes place, and the structure that the meetings provide that's more meaningful than the actual plans themselves.
A lot of companies don't have crisis management plans in place, and even if they do, they haven't updated them or practiced to make sure they'll work when necessary. Do you think organizations should put plans in place now so that they can help deal with employees effectively after a crisis?
Well, certainly prevention is uh, always more ideal than focusing solely on cure. But I mean, that takes on two different meanings. There's the actual plan itself of protection and who to call in case of an emergency and what type of emergency and all of that. And then there is the process of rebuilding after. And before rebuilding, there's a period of shock and how to manage that level of shock. And that's something that I think can also be planned in the same way the typical meaning of your question would be handled. The typical meaning of your question would be the disaster emergency plan, and we go to this room and we dial this and we all coordinate. When it's this, we do this, and when it's this type of situation B, then we're here. I mean, all of that certainly appropriate and necessary. But the flip side, or the further on the continuum, would be after the emergency is handled and on an immediate level, and and the employees that are affected and the organization itself is in shock, what kind of plan for that? And I think that also needs to be more mapped out and addressed. And I think that meetings and having ongoing meetings and just knowing that there'll be structured communication on an ongoing basis within the organization is key. What happens with most organizations is that they have there's a mental health professional who's made available, like myself, for the organization, and certainly that's important. But it feels like such a one-off. The meeting with the mental health professional feels like such a one-off that out of the realm, atypical, as opposed to normalizing that and having the concept of talking with the mental health professional already integrated, already made part of the plan, would be more ideal. People actually feel like they're exposed from talking to a mental health professional. Others in the organization may wonder about their level of strength, how well they're handling the circumstances. So it becomes a little daunting because they feel like they're on display. So that the part of conversations and ongoing meetings plus meetings with mental health professional could be brought to the planning stage just the way an alarm system would be, or which room to go to in case of an emergency would be.
Do you have any advice about the first steps that companies should take to help their employees after a crisis?
Assembling everyone as much as possible, however that could be structured. I mean, with multiple locations and technology, there could be some way to have an assembly meeting that would be partially virtual or breaking everyone into small groups. But the line between management and employees needs to be blurred in the sense that everybody needs to contribute to creating some cohesiveness and creating their own opportunity for a debriefing where there can be just a baseline level of an assessment of we have this shared reality. We're all in shock. We may be in shock on different levels, but there's this shared reality of what happened. Let's just breathe and digest that reality together and go from there. And so much of this is about the process more than the specifics. It's the process of the fact that there is the ability for everybody to assemble and it's safe to safe in the sense that there's no job jeopardy for saying this. I'll have nightmares about this for the next 5 years, I'm afraid, or whatever else vulnerable statements could be made, that there's a level of security from a job standpoint or from a standpoint of feeling evaluated because everybody has the same shared reality. And they're all going to put that on the line, from C-level executives to people who are doing admin work.
Do you think there are personality types that may have a harder or an easier time dealing with the consequences of a violent crisis?
It's sort of chicken and egg in terms of personality versus circumstances. Chicken and egg in that. So yes, I mean, certain personality types are more geared, have more armor for situations, more say psychological armor than other personality types. But the chicken and egg part is what's making up that personality. Any of us, you put us in a horrific situation, our personality is different immediately following than it would be getting, good news about something, and our personality is different. There's a main structure to it, but I believe that the personality that's ideal for weathering crisis also has social support. But that personality, and you also look at the level of stress someone has in their personal life versus not. But even then, a personality type of someone who is more keyed into others in their immediate environment.
Can you share any observations about the trends you see and how well or poorly companies are helping employees deal with the aftermath of a violent crisis?
Sure. There's a trend of making mental health professionals more readily available and in frequent cases, the mental health professional is made available on premise at work, and this is leading to a style of management where mental health professionals are as commonplace without a stigma in the way an alarm system would not have a stigma. There's no stigma for using an alarm system or having security. And mental health professionals are being framed in a similar way.
How did you become involved in providing your services to companies in the aftermath of violent crisis situations?
I became a provider for an organization that would make mental health professionals available, that hired mental health professionals. They would fill contracts when a crisis came up. This company was contacted, and I was one of the contracted therapists assigned to go to various incidents when a debriefing was needed or psychological first aid was needed.
My last question for you today is, where can people go to learn more about your expertise and services?
Oh, sure thing. My website, which is grandcentralcounselinggroup.com.
Well, thanks for joining me today, Pamela. My guest today has been Pamela Garber, a therapist with the Grand Central Counseling and Mediation Group in New York City.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Crisis Ahead podcast. Remember, it's not a matter of if companies and organizations will have a crisis, but when.